In the endless darkness where stars whispered ancient secrets, a civilization stood on the precipice of extinction. For 300 long years, the Galactic Council had fought a war they could not win, a war against an enemy that felt no fear, no pity, and no remorse. But tonight, everything was about to change. Professor Denton Ward pressed his trembling hands against the cold observation window of Research Station Omega. Beyond the reinforced plasteel, the void itself pulsed with an unnatural, sickly light. His tired gray eyes reflected the cosmic anomaly that had consumed the last 6 months of his life. An impossible rift in space-time, a scar that defied every law of physics he had dedicated 40 years to studying. Behind him, a flurry of motion. His brilliant assistant, Kira Voss, frantically worked at her console, her dark braids swinging as she jumped between holographic displays that painted her bronze skin in shades of emergency red. "Energy readings are climbing again," Kira called out, her voice tight with a panic she was barely managing to contain. "Professor, we have to evacuate the station. These numbers, they don't make sense. Nothing generates this much power naturally. It's impossible." Denton didn't turn from the window. He was a man who had seen too much in his career to run from the unknown, even when every fiber of his being, every instinct honed by decades of survival, screamed at him to flee. "Record everything, Kira," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Whatever happens next, the Council needs this data. This could be the most important discovery in history." 7,000 light-years away, Supreme Commander Thorne Blackwell stood like a statue of weathered stone in the war room of Fortress Meridian. He stared at tactical displays that showed his civilization bleeding to death, system by system. His face, a roadmap of scars from battles that had claimed billions, was etched with deep lines carved by decisions that haunted his sleep. Around him, the Council's military leadership waited in a heavy, suffocating silence. They all knew what the relentless red tide sweeping across their territory meant. The swarm was winning. 72 systems lost this month alone, Thorne said, his gravelly voice carrying the immense weight of those deaths. "Our fleets are stretched beyond the breaking point. We're not fighting a war anymore. We're watching extinction approach in slow motion." Ambassador Celine Kors, her normally luminescent skin dimmed with exhaustion and grief, stepped forward. Her species, the Lumini, had been among the first the swarm devoured. She was one of the last of her kind. "The outer colonies are gone, Commander," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My home world fell 3 days ago. 4 billion souls vanished. The swarm doesn't just kill, it erases. There's nothing left but bare rock." As if to punctuate her words, the holographic map updated. 3 more systems blinked from Council Blue to Swarm Red. Real-time conquest. The swarm moved like a cosmic plague, unstoppable, absolute. Each crimson marker represented worlds, ancient cultures, and billions of lives consumed by an enemy that felt no mercy because it felt nothing at all. The swarm existed only for 3 purposes: to feed, to grow, to devour. In the science division of the war room, Dr. Yuki Tanaka worked her controls with the mechanical precision of a surgeon. Her hands were impossibly steady despite the chaos erupting around her. As the Council's leading xenobiologist, she had studied the swarm for decades, watched it evolve, adapt, and overcome every weapon, every strategy the Council threw at it. "They're accelerating," she reported, her quiet voice somehow cutting through the rising tension. "My pattern analysis suggests they're converging on the core worlds they know were weakened. They're going for the heart." Thorne felt a cold, final certainty settle in his chest. This was it. The endgame. 300 years of desperate resistance, of unimaginable sacrifice, and they had finally run out of time. "How long?" he asked, his voice flat. "How long until they reach Meridian?" "Weeks," Yuki replied, her dark eyes meeting his. "Maybe days if they decide to push hard." She paused, her fingers dancing over her console. "But Commander, there's something else. Something strange. We've detected unusual patterns in their movement. They're redistributing forces from the outer sectors, pulling back from established territories." "Pulling back?" Celine's voice rose with a desperate, fragile hope. But the swarm doesn't retreat. In 3 centuries, they have never retreated. Until now, Yuki confirmed, bringing the data to the main screen. Across a dozen sectors, the crimson tide was receding. Swarm forces were abandoning their positions, moving at incredible speeds toward a single, infinitesimally small point in space. They're all heading toward the same coordinates, in the dead zone, where that ancient rift exists. Thorne knew those coordinates. Every military officer in the council did. The rift was a legend, a spatial anomaly that had existed for 50,000 years, sealed away by the precursors, the mysterious, almost mythical civilization that had vanished long before any of their own species had achieved spaceflight. The precursors had left behind technology so advanced it seemed like magic, and warnings so dire that no one had ever dared approach their sealed sites. Why would the swarm care about ancient ruins? Thorne asked, the question hanging in the air. But deep down, a terrifying thought was already taking root. The swarm's hive intelligence was vast, ancient, and beyond their comprehension. If it remembered something from 50,000 years ago, something that made it change its tactics for the first time in 3 centuries, then that something was either their salvation or their damnation. Back on Research Station Omega, Denton's instruments screamed their final warnings as the rift began to violently tear itself apart. 5 decades of careful monitoring had shown the seal degrading, the precursor technology finally failing after millennia of silent watch. Kira grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with primal terror. "Professor, the station's breaking apart. The integrity fields are failing. We have to go now." But Denton couldn't look away. Through the observation window, reality itself was unwinding like a spool of thread. The rift expanded, a wound in the universe, and through it, he saw something impossible. Ships, thousands of them. They were emerging from whatever prison the precursors had built, pouring into normal space like a flood held back for too long. These were not council ships. They were massive, angular vessels that looked like they were forged for a single purpose: war. Their hulls were covered in weapon systems and designs that made the council's most advanced technology look like children's toys. "Oh God," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible. "What did the precursors seal away?" The answer came as the lead ship flared its engines, revealing markings along its colossal hull, strange blocky symbols that the station's computers struggled to translate. Denton watched, mesmerized, as the translation algorithm worked, piecing together a language that shouldn't exist. He felt his world, his understanding of the galaxy, shift on its axis when the meaning appeared on his screen. UTSS Valkyrie, United Terran Star Systems. Terran, human. A species that existed only in fragmented precursor records, mentioned only in warnings and dire cautions. They were described as dangerous, unpredictable, and so aggressive that they were sealed away for the protection of the entire galaxy. Denton had read those records. He had dismissed them as mythology, the precursors being overly cautious about some minor, primitive civilization they'd encountered and contained. He had been catastrophically wrong. The human fleet held its formation, thousands upon thousands of warships waiting in perfect, silent military precision. And behind them, the rift continued to expand, revealing more ships, an armada that had been hidden away, imprisoned by the precursors for 50,000 years, and was now free. Denton's instruments detected power signatures that shouldn't be possible, weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand the fury of a star. This wasn't a minor civilization. This was a nightmare. This was the one thing the mighty precursors had truly feared. Across all of Council space, every sensor array, every long-range telescope turned toward the rift. On Fortress Meridian, Thorne watched his displays update with the new arrivals, watched the impossible numbers climb as more and more human ships emerged from the tear in reality. 50,000 vessels. 100,000. The count just kept rising. And then, as if responding to some unseen, silent signal, every swarm fleet in the galaxy stopped its advance. For the first time in 300 years of relentless war, the tide of destruction simply halted. Thorne watched in utter disbelief as the tactical map began to change. The swarm forces were retreating, abandoning their hard-won conquests, turning tail and fleeing at maximum speed. The swarm was afraid. And that left the Galactic Council with one simple and absolutely terrifying question. What in the universe could possibly scare a hive mind that had terrorized the entire galaxy for centuries? The answer was now sitting on their doorstep, an army of ghosts from a forgotten age, with 50,000 years of anger to unleash. The cure, it seemed, was about to be infinitely worse than the disease. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think will happen next? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic tales from the far reaches of space. We'll see you in the next one. For 3 centuries, the galaxy has been losing a war. The swarm, a relentless, all-consuming hive mind, has devoured thousands of worlds, pushing every civilization to the brink of extinction. But today, the war just stopped. Across every front, from the besieged core worlds to the desolate outer rim, the impossible is happening. Swarm fleets are in full, chaotic retreat. On the command deck of Fortress Meridian, General Thorne watches the data stream in, his 30 years of fighting this enemy screaming that this is wrong. The swarm doesn't retreat. It doesn't hesitate. It only consumes. Confirm those readings, he orders, his voice tight. Hope is a dangerous luxury in a war like this. Lieutenant Paz Moreno's voice trembles as she replies. Confirmed, sir. All swarm forces are in full retreat. They're running. She hesitates, her face pale. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the swarm. Ice crawls through Thorne's veins. The swarm has never communicated, it only kills. Put it through. The war room fills with a sound that chills the soul. Millions of voices screaming as one, a chorus of pure primal terror. The words are fragmented, fractured by a panic so profound it's breaking the hive mind itself. Ancient enemy returns. Genetic memory confirms. The sealed ones emerge. Cannot fight. Cannot win. Must flee. Must survive. The humans have awakened. The transmission cuts, leaving a silence more profound than any explosion. Who are the humans? And what could possibly terrify a monster that has feasted on half the galaxy? The answer hangs in space near a shimmering tear in reality, a rift. A fleet of ships has emerged, thousands of them, radiating power unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. They just sit there, silent and patient, watching the swarm flee. On a nearby research station, Professor Denton Ward watches one of these mysterious ships approach. It's sleek, ancient, and moving with a lethal grace. His young assistant, Kira, voices the thought on everyone's mind. Professor, we could be the first to make contact with an entirely new civilization. Well, new to us, ancient to everyone else. They grant docking clearance. 3 figures emerge, humanoid in shape, clad in advanced environmental suits. When they remove their helmets, they look surprisingly ordinary. A woman steps forward, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Professor Ward, I'm Captain Nina Reeves of the Terran Exploration Corps. We've been monitoring your research. Denton, his mind racing with a million questions, gets straight to the point. Captain, why did the ancient precursors seal you away 50,000 years ago? Captain Reeves's expression darkens. Because we asked them to. We knew what was coming. The precursors were builders and thinkers, not fighters. When they detected the swarm approaching from dark space, they panicked. But they knew a species who could fight it. Kira breathes the word. Humanity. You fought the swarm before. The tactical specialist, Sergeant Moss, speaks for the first time, his voice hard as iron. We didn't just fight it. We nearly exterminated it, hunted it to the edge of the galaxy, and taught it the meaning of fear. The swarm you've been fighting, that's just the remnant. That's what was left after we almost ended it completely. The revelation is staggering. The unstoppable scourge of the galaxy is just a shadow, a ghost of a foe humanity had already broken. Then why did you stop? Denton demands. Why let it survive and leave the rest of us to suffer? Dr. Park, their science officer, steps forward. Because the war changed us. 1,000 years of fighting turned us into monsters. We were winning the war but losing our souls. We were becoming the very thing we were trying to destroy. So you didn't run, Nina corrects, her voice firm as steel. We prepared. We had the precursors seal us away in stasis, our fleet preserved. We set a trigger. When the swarm returned and grew strong enough to threaten the galaxy again, the seals would break. We would wake up. And we would finish the job. The cold, calculated logic is terrifying. This isn't a rescue. This is pest control, scheduled 50,000 years in advance. Back on Fortress Meridian, General Thorne watches the recording of this conversation. He sees the casual way they discuss galactic-scale extermination. Ambassador Celine, a being of living light, flickers beside him. They're offering to help us, she says quietly. They can end the war, save us. So why does that terrify me more than the swarm ever did? Thorne knows why. Because the swarm is a force of nature, it's predictable, but humans... He gestures to the frozen image of Captain Reeves. They're strategic. They planned for this. They let the swarm grow strong again, just to give themselves a reason to awaken. A purpose. A horrifying thought dawns on everyone in the room. What happens after? After the swarm is gone, what does humanity do with a galaxy full of species they see as weak? What does a predator do when it runs out of prey? The human fleet is now on the move, spreading out in perfect, lethal formations. They move like a single hungry organism, beautiful and terrible all at once. Professor Denton watches them go, his heart a knot of hope and dread. Kira asks the question hanging over the entire galaxy. Professor, are we watching our salvation or our doom? He has no answer. He only knows that the ancient nightmares have returned. The humans are awake and the galaxy will never be the same. Thanks for watching. We dive deep into stories like this every week, exploring the biggest what-ifs in science fiction. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. We'll see you in the next one. On the bridge of the UTSS Valkyrie, Captain Nina Reeves watched her fleet move. Thousands of warships, a ghost army from a forgotten age, now awake and hungry. For 50,000 years they slept in stasis, humanity's final answer to an unkillable enemy. Her first officer, Hassan, watched the displays, his eyes burning with a vengeance 1,200 years old. He'd lost his home before Earth itself was a memory, and he had been waiting a long, long time for this. The swarm is afraid, Nina said, her voice a low hum. Good. The holographic map of the galaxy showed the swarm's territory, vast red zones of consumed worlds now flickering. They were running. For the first time in millennia, the galactic plague was in full retreat. Behind her, the viewports showed the culmination of 1,000 years of total war. Dreadnoughts like holes in space, carriers birthing swarms of fighters, destroyers prowling the flanks. It was a perfectly preserved engine of annihilation. But as Nina watched this lethal ballet, a feeling she hadn't experienced in 50 millennia crept into her heart. Doubt. Meanwhile, on Fortress Meridian, Commander Thorne of the Galactic Council watched the same dance unfold. The humans weren't just fighting, they were herding. Driving the swarm towards the Vega cluster, a gravitational graveyard where jump drives failed. A killing box, Thorne whispered, the realization dawning on him. The humans weren't just aiming for victory. They were planning an extinction. They're enjoying this, he said, a chill running down his spine. The precision, the cold, calculated movements. It wasn't the desperation of a cornered species. It was the art of a master predator. Just then, a message arrived from Captain Reeves, an invitation. Come, watch your enemy die. Thorne felt his jaw tighten. He would go, and he would record everything. The shuttle that came for him was a museum piece, ancient technology maintained with a terrifying perfection. The pilot, a young corporal named Diane Fletcher, patted the bulkhead. This bird flew against the swarm when your species were still discovering fire, she said with pride. Thorne asked her how it felt, waking up to a galaxy that had moved on without them. Her answer was unsettling. Honestly, it feels like coming home. The galaxy's new, but the swarm is the same. Fighting it, it feels right, like remembering who you really are. These humans had been at peace for an eternity, yet they slipped back into war as if it were yesterday. What did that say about their true nature? On the Valkyrie's bridge, Nina greeted Thorn with cool professionalism. He watched the final phase begin. The swarm was trapped, but the human fleet's perfect discipline was starting to fray. Ships broke formation, pursuing swarm vessels with a feral intensity. The operation was becoming a hunt. "Maintain formation discipline," Nina commanded, but Thorn could hear the strain in her voice. She was holding back a primal instinct that coursed through her people, an instinct that screamed for release. The crew watched the tactical displays with hungry eyes, their hands clenching, born and bred for this single, bloody purpose. The swarm, cornered and facing oblivion, made its last stand. Millions of bioships formed a living wall of chitin and rage. If they were to die, they would die fighting. Nina's voice cut through the tension, broadcast to every human ship. "Weapons free. Prosecute targets at will. Show no mercy. Give no quarter. This ends today." Space itself screamed. Weapons that could crack moons and ignite atmospheres turned the Vega cluster into a charnel house. It was industrial-scale slaughter. But what chilled Thorn to the bone wasn't the violence itself. It was the sound from the human ships. Cheers, laughter. This wasn't a grim duty. It was catharsis. It was joy. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the swarm was gone, extinct. 300 years of terror, erased in a single afternoon. On the Valkyrie's bridge, the crew erupted in celebration. They had done it. The war was over. But Nina didn't feel triumphant. She felt empty. Who were they, without an enemy to hunt? Who were these warriors in a time of peace? Thorn approached her quietly. "Congratulations, Captain, you've saved the galaxy. What will you do now?" Nina met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw his own fears reflected. What does a species perfected for war do when the war is won? Where does humanity fit in a galaxy it can so easily dominate? "We'll figure it out," Nina said softly. "We learned to be more than weapons once. We'll learn again." She turned to the viewport, to the drifting wreckage that was once a galactic nightmare. "But Commander," she said, her voice filled with a quiet plea, "we're going to need help. The galaxy will need to teach us how to live without fighting. Can the Council accept us, knowing what we are?" Thorn considered everything he had seen, the cold precision, the barely contained rage, the joyous slaughter. He saw the predator, but he also saw the plea in Nina's eyes. He saw a people waking from a long, violent dream, now facing a future they were never built for. Finally, he extended his hand. "We can try," he said. "Together." Nina took his hand, a firm grip that felt less like a soldier's and more like a survivor's. In that moment, a new kind of hope was kindled, was not the desperate hope of the dying, but the quiet, cautious optimism of those who have seen the abyss and are now trying to build a future in the light. The story of humanity and the galaxy has just begun. What happens next is up to all of them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into the future of humanity, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. See you in the future. 3 months after the swarm's extinction, Professor Denton Ward stood in what had once been a war room, now a hub of creation. Holographic displays, once tracking enemy fleets, now showed construction projects, trade routes, and cultural exchange programs. Fortress Meridian was shedding its military skin, revealing something softer underneath, something that could grow instead of just endure. Beside him, Captain Nina Reeves studied the displays with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. "It's strange," she said quietly. "For 1,000 years before stasis, I woke up every day knowing exactly what I needed to do. Fight, survive. Now," she gestured at the peaceful scenes, "now I wake up and have to decide what to do. It's terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Denton smiled warmly. Welcome to the burden of peace, Captain. It's harder than war in many ways because the answers aren't clear, but the possibilities are endless. Across the station, in a former briefing room, an extraordinary meeting was underway. Commander Thorne sat with human military leaders, not to plan battles but to discuss demilitarization, how to scale down war fleets, how to repurpose weapons factories into centers of learning, how to help soldiers become citizens. Sergeant Roland Moss shifted uncomfortably. It's not that simple, Commander. My people have been soldiers for so long. Some of us don't know how to be anything else. We're having trouble adjusting. Ambassador Celine leaned forward, her form glowing with steady warmth. Then perhaps we can help each other learn. The Council spent 300 years learning to survive. Humanity spent 1,000 years learning to fight. Together, maybe we can teach each other balance. Lieutenant Commander Hassan's voice was vulnerable. Some of our crew are struggling. We lost people during the war 50,000 years ago. We went into stasis carrying grief we never got to process. Now that the enemy is gone, that grief is surfacing. We need help learning how to heal. Dr. Tanaka nodded. Grief is not uniquely human. We've all lost people. Perhaps that shared pain can become a bridge. We can create counseling programs, support networks, spaces where warriors from all species can learn to lay down their trauma along with their weapons. The conversation continued for hours, painful and honest. It wasn't easy friendship, but a respectful partnership was forming. On Research Station Omega, a different kind of collaboration was happening. Kira Voss and Dr. James Park were combining human and council technology. Your power generation methods are incredible, Kira said, holding a human reactor core no bigger than her thumb. But your distribution networks are inefficient. If we combine your generation with our distribution systems, we could revolutionize energy across the galaxy. James grinned. And your quantum computing could enhance our navigation systems. Humanity has been in stasis while the galaxy advanced in different directions. We're not superior or inferior. We're complementary. Together we can build things neither of us could create alone. This synergy was happening everywhere. Human engineers and council architects designed cities. Human geneticists and council biologists cured diseases. Human artists and council musicians created new forms of expression. But peace wasn't easy for everyone. In Fortress Meridian, young soldiers trained for combat now wandered streets meant for peace, struggling for purpose. Some found new talents in art or diplomacy. Others felt lost, their warrior instincts with no outlet. Corporal Diane Fletcher sat in a peace garden, designed by council counselors for transitioning soldiers. Beside her sat Paz Moreno, the young officer who first detected the human fleet. Do you ever miss it? Paz asked softly. The clarity of war? Diane was quiet for a long moment. Every day, she admitted. War is horrible, but it's simple. Peace is messy and complicated. But then I remember what we fought for. Not just survival, but the chance to have these problems. The chance to be confused about our purpose because we're not fighting for our lives. That's a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. Paz smiled. My grandmother used to say the greatest challenge isn't surviving disaster, but learning to thrive after it passes. I think maybe that's what we're all learning now. In the council chambers, Supreme Chancellor Verusol called an unprecedented session. Representatives from every member species gathered alongside human delegates. 3 months ago, we stood on the edge of extinction, Verusol began. Today, we stand at the edge of possibility. Humanity returned not as conquerors, but as the allies we needed. They have proven that strength without compassion is tyranny, but compassion without strength is vulnerability. Together, we represent balance. She gestured to Captain Reeves. I propose that humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, not as our saviors, but as our partners in building a future worthy of all the lives lost to bring us here. The vote wasn't unanimous. Some feared human military power, but the majority saw the opportunity. Humanity was officially part of the galactic community. Nina stood to address the chamber, her voice filled with determination. We don't pretend to be perfect. We're a species that once became so focused on winning we almost lost ourselves. Now we have a second chance and we won't waste it. We offer you our strength, our knowledge, our dedication. But more than that, we offer our commitment to grow, to learn from you as you learn from us, to build a galaxy where no species has to face extinction alone. The chamber erupted in applause, a sound mixing relief and hope. The scars of war wouldn't heal overnight. But it was a beginning. Later, Nina and Denton stood on an observation deck, watching ships from 100 worlds move in peaceful patterns. Do you think it will last? Nina asked. This peace? Denton considered it. Nothing lasts forever, Captain. But I think what we've created here is resilient. We've proven that vastly different species can work together when they choose to. That's worth protecting. Nina smiled faintly. The hardest part has been learning to hope again, to believe tomorrow might actually be better than today. War destroys hope. Peace demands it. Then we'll learn together, Denton replied. One choice at a time. On Earth's memorial station, a new monument was unveiled. It bore the names of every human who died fighting the swarm, but it also carried names from every council species who fell. Commander Hassan stood before it, finding his family's names among the millions. Beside him, Selene placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. They didn't speak. In their shared grief, a bridge was built that words could never construct. Humanity settled into its new role, not as warriors, not as saviors, but as partners. Children born in this new era would grow up learning human languages alongside council dialects, studying the swarm war as history, not a current threat. In her quarters, Nina recorded a message for the future. To those who come after us, she began, we leave you a galaxy at peace, purchased with blood, sacrifice, and the willingness to change. We were warriors who learned to be builders, isolated survivors who became part of something larger. Be worthy of what was sacrificed to give you this chance. Be better than we were. And always remember, strength without wisdom is destruction, but wisdom without strength is vulnerability. Balance both, and you can shape the stars themselves. She ended the recording looking out at the station where humans and aliens worked side by side. And for the first time since waking from 50,000 years of sleep, Nina felt truly at home. Not in the war she'd left behind, but in the journey between them. The void had opened, humanity had returned, and they had changed everything. But more importantly, everything had changed them too. In that mutual transformation lay the seeds of a future worthy of all the darkness they'd endured. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey into the aftermath of a galactic war. It's stories like these that remind us of the power of hope and collaboration. If you enjoyed this dive into a universe rebuilding itself, please hit that like button, subscribe for more epic tales, and let us know in the comments what you thought of humanity and its new role in the galaxy. We'll see you in the next one.